Does everybody have a Bible? Bible. Important today? Always important. But before we get into it, good to see you all. Happy 1 week after Easter, because every day is Easter. The Lord is risen. Thank you very much. He's alive. And that's what we hear. That's why I want to look into His Word and learn from Him. But before we learn from His Word, here's a completely different side question. Just imagine you are stranded somewhere on a desert island or in the desert. And you have no water. What do you do?
Dig a hole.
A hole? Okay. To do what?
To find a stream of water.
Okay, so you would dig down and try to hope that somewhere there's water underneath you?
There's some techniques for it.
Yeah. So you don't have anything except of what you strand there with. Well, yeah, if you dig at some point, you can just close it from the top again, yeah? So, you were brave.
Pray a lot.
Yeah.
Just sit there and pray and wait for it.
Yeah, next to the other place over there.
Next to digging. So why do you dig? With every dig, it's like one Our Father who is in heaven. Find a cactus. Because in fruits and plants, there's water.
You can drink your pee.
But you can only do that so often, and then you run out of it. So that might help you for a few days, but then it's going to get hard. I was researching some techniques, and if you find plants, basically you have good ways to get water out of it. I would never neglect the prayer, that's always important. But then on the what can I do, you can dig, but the chances to find a stream underwater are comparatively low in the desert. Yet, if you find the right spot, where, for example, two dunes come together, often, or a dried out stream, often there is leftover water somewhere in the sand. So you don't really see it, you don't really feel it, but there might be some that when the sun hits it, it actually evaporates and you lose it. So what do? You dig a hole and you try to cover it up with something. The hole has to go down. I'm going to show you a picture. So the hole has to go down. Just if you ever end up in the desert, now you know. So you make a hole, put a container of something underneath, a glass, a cup, something that you find, or if you find leaves, or maybe even just a cloth, because that can collect water. And you have to cover the hole with something else. Now, if when you're stranded you have some tarp or something else that is plastic, that's ideal, but if you don't, you can also take other cloth, like just your sweater or something, and close the hole. So you first dig a hole, but then you close it up. And make sure that whatever you close it with doesn't fall in, so that's the rocks on the side. And then you put one rock in the center so that it's heavy in the middle. Because when the sun comes, especially if you do that in the morning, you have best chances. When the sun comes, the water will evaporate and will get stuck on that ceiling that you built, and it will run down to drop into that bowl, or if you just have a cloth, then into something there. And that's how you collect water. Ideally, if you find a plant that is not a cactus or something that has water in it already, you can take the leaves of that plant and put it around it, here and here, because that will also then steam up and give you more water. Alright. So if you ever end up in the desert, now you know. But if you've never been in the desert and you're not sitting somewhere in Toronto where someone is telling you about it, even though it does not have anything to do with your life, you might not know. And there was a group of people that had no idea how to get water in the desert. And these people were the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. And that's the story of Exodus, which in the fall we already went through the first chapters, and now we want to continue the next chapters. So in the fall we talked already about the Israelites coming from Egypt and finally getting out after the 10 plagues, coming through the Red Sea, crossing the Red Sea, and that's where we stopped. But in our series on the Lord's Prayer, We also talked about daily bread and the story of the manna from heaven. So that's actually in Exodus as well, and happens a little later. Here it's the nice symbol of the quail, where manna and quail is given in Exodus chapter 13. Yeah, 16. Sorry. You can also zoom in, that's easier. So that's the map. They walk down and they end up on the other side of the sea here. They come to Mara first, which is a story that we skipped, where they have only bitter water, only bad water, because sometimes in the desert there is water somewhere, an oasis or a stream, but that was all bad. And when they prayed, God said, Moses, take this log of wood and throw it in there, and the water became good. And then from there, they actually moved on to find wells of water where there was an oasis, and 70 trees apparently, where they stayed for a while. And as they then continued to hike from there towards Mount Sinai, which was the goal why they went down there, not quite there, to have this moment with God at Mount Sinai that we get to in a few weeks. On that way, they became super hungry. And they didn't have any food anymore because everything they had taken from Egypt ran out. So at that moment that they didn't have food, they were like, God, we need food. And God gave manna, and when they complained about it all being bread, He also gave quails. So they had some meat. And then they keep walking. And as they keep walking, they come to a place called Rephaim. And that is the story we want to read today. Because, as you might know, if you keep walking through the desert, you come to places where there is no water anymore. And if you don't know how to use water, how to get water out of something, you might end up in a very difficult situation, especially if you're there with families, livestock, and many, many, many creatures that need water. That's where we end up in Exodus chapter 17, the verses 1 to 6. So let's open that together. Exodus chapter 17. 1 to 7 actually, I'm sorry. 1 to 7. Exodus, the second book overall, 17 big numbers. So the second book in the whole Bible, if you start in the beginning, you get it soon. Big number 17, small number 1 to 7. Does someone want to read it out loud for us?
The whole Israelite community set out from the desert of Sin, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test?" But the people were thirsty for water, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord answered Moses, "Go out in front of the people. Take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the reed, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." So Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled, and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
Thank you so much. Massa, Meribah, you might have it on the bottom as an explanation, means testing and quarreling. So when I read this passage again, preparing for today, I read over it several times. I was like, I so understand the people of Israel. I so understand that, like, you come to this point where, like, God, you brought me here. why are we running out of water now? And I think, like, in our lives we have many of these moments where we feel like, why is this happening? Why am I here at this point in my life? Why are things falling apart? Why do I not have water? Or why do I feel tired so much? Or why do I not have the right idea for the next step that's coming in life? Or even for the paper that I have to write right now? Or the next living situation? Or I had something figured out. I thought we were in a good place, and suddenly you come to this question of like, but I don't feel like there's real water, like actually life is going on. Almost like dying inside, especially then emotionally and spiritually. Even if we have food and water, all of us, which is a great privilege and blessing, then maybe we come to these points emotionally and spiritually that we feel like, I've done all of these steps and I thought I was on a good path, and suddenly it goes down again. Like over the last weeks, I've done a little bit more reflecting, even with like a therapist on the last years, to just go deeper into like my own emotions. Why do I get angry at this and that so quickly? Which is really good, and I really encourage everyone to talk to people about the emotions. And I was on this really good path. And then suddenly there were one or two things where I felt right back into that. I was like, wait, I thought I was working on that, and now I feel so frustrated again with something super small that wasn't even important. And then like, oh, why God? Why do I not have the solution here? Why do you still let me go through this emotion? And it wasn't even bad. And if I already have them in such small things, just with my frustration about something that doesn't matter, how much more if it does matter in big ways, where it feels like things are falling apart. I don't know what the future brings. I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know how to handle this situation. It's just overbearing, and it feels like the water is just drying out slowly. Or we have our containers that we brought from Egypt that we filled up again at that oasis and that place of water at Mara, and now it's slowly getting emptier. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm just running out of energy, running out of steam, running out of emotions, positive emotions, running out of the capacity to stay healthy and all of that, and I'm running out of ideas how to deal with it. And to be honest, I feel like I have these moments, and I bet you have them too. And we can just call them desert moments. It feels like the water is running out. And these desert moments are actually moments that really reveal something about ourselves. Those are the moments that most reveal how we see ourselves and how we see God. They amplify the relationship, especially the lack of relationship in some things. So they amplify where we have a twisted picture, or where we're missing something of the big picture of who God is and what He's doing. And that's the same thing for the Israelites. As they are in this desert moment, as they are in this moment where the water runs out, it suddenly magnifies and amplifies all of their feelings, all of their confusion, all of their wondering, what is God actually doing? And it's so interesting because through Exodus we have multiple of these steps, and then even the same story with the water happens again in Numbers. It's not the same situation because the story goes differently in the end. But again they come to a point where they're like, God, why did you bring us here to die? They come back to this moment so often of like, well, we took this step of faith, why does it go differently now? And as they go through all of this, I think it reveals every time again something about their understanding of themselves and of God. And then the nice thing is that we have someone to compare to who lives a very different relationship to God than the whole people of Israel, and that is Moses. And so as we look, especially in this text, we can see where do maybe the Israelites make a conclusion or have an idea about God that's not what God is like. And how does Moses do it differently, and I think in a healthier, better way that really brings him closer to God. So let's look through that text. I'm just going to go through it with the PowerPoint, but if you have it in front of you, you can also see what I'm referring to. The first thing what happens as the water runs out, the people of Israel realize, oh no, the water's running out. So they turn to Moses. When Moses is overwhelmed with the people of Israel, who does he turn to?
God.
To God. in my life, very often when I'm getting into a situation where I feel like it's getting frustrating, or I don't know how to handle it, I turn to people. I should turn. It would be better for me to turn to God. And that's not God versus people, but like, who do I turn to first? And they immediately cry out to Moses, and like it says, they go right to Moses and say, Moses, you have to do something. Moses, why did you bring us here? Because for them, Moses has become this turn-to person for all their existential questions. Where then Moses says, well, I'm not the person to answer all your questions, but actually your Creator is the one who knows about your existential questions. Humans can be helpful if they understood a little more to help you to take a step, but they don't have the final answers. It's the same with pastors or any leader in a church. Like, we are not perfect. We don't have all the answers. We're super happy to walk with you. But our job technically is to point you to God, not to answer all your questions. Our job is to bring you to your Creator and let Him speak into your lives rather than solving all your issues. And that's an issue, that's a problem here for the Israelites, because they got so used to asking Moses everything that they completely stopped talking to God. It's not even their instinct reaction is to go to Moses. It's not to go to God. What's your instinct reaction? When you have a question, when you don't know where you're at, when you have such a desert moment, is your instinct reaction, your first step you take, going to another person or turning to God? And then Moses shows us the next step, where the people don't just turn to God and say, so what's coming next? They start to question God. And then later it's called testing. It's not a testing because they say, God, if you don't do this, then you're not God. It's a testing because God had promised something. They said, well, if you promise it, you have to give it to us now. And if you promise to be with us and you don't do anything, you're not with us. And also, why did you even do that? So they don't even try to find an answer from God. They just try to complain to God and to accuse Him. So they start to accuse God, to question Him, rather than seeking an answer from God. Well, Moses does the opposite. He inquires God. He turns to God and says, what am I supposed to do? What is happening? He doesn't say, how dare you, or why did you, or give me. But he says, I don't know what to do anymore. What comes next? Which is then so interesting that while the people tell Moses what he has to do, Moses asks God what he should do. And that is something that like twists everything for me. To be honest, like when I reflect over the last years of my prayer life, and when we have prayer meetings here at church or pray together, so much about what we pray is what God should be doing, or asking God to do something. And that is not wrong. Not at all. God says, bring supplications, ask me. If you don't ask, but in comparison to how much we ask God to do something, the question of God, what do you want me to do, doesn't come up that often. And I'm wondering if in these situations, rather than us sitting there being like, God, please give me, and if it doesn't happen, then we ask, why don't you? Could it change something if we ask, God, I don't know what's happening in this situation, what do you want me to do? Because through that, we would then not magnify, the next point actually, so let's not magnify and amplify the problem. We don't become even more of a part of the problem, but we will become a part of the solution. And I do think God wants you to be part of the solution. Because otherwise, that's the point in between, he becomes something like a butler rather than a provider. And it feels like the people of Israel, they treat Moses, and through Moses also God, like a butler. A butler is a person that just serves you every need, every wish you have. You say something, the butler does it. A provider on the other side, the way that Moses sees it, a provider is someone who plans ahead, who has an overview, who makes sure that you're taken care of, but who also gives you dignity that you have a part in all of this. Who also is in charge rather than you being in charge. A butler listens to you. But if God is the provider, that means we have to turn to Him to ask Him what comes next. All of this, I was watching my bunnies this morning. We have two pet bunnies, and I try not to bring them up too often because, there's so many pastors that always talk about their kids, so there's the inclination if you don't have kids, then they talk about the pets. Sometimes I do it, but this morning, it's just so funny because these two little creatures, they don't even know how to ask. They don't even know how to seek something, but they just sit there. And then they start scratching, and then they start chewing on something that is not their food. And you realize, yes, they have never learned to be part of the solution. All they need is someone to go to the fridge, open it, take out the greens, and just throw it in front of them. And if that doesn't happen, then they destroy something else and make sure that you realize they are in need of something. How much do you do that with God? That we just sit around, we do our best life, we love our head scratches from God, our good blessings, the good moments, and when we don't have them, then we become these irritated people that start scratching on things, start complaining about something, start like, God, you have to give me, and then what our bunnies do is they just run in front of the fridge and sit right in front of it. And just wait there, look up. They don't say anything because they cannot speak, but they look up. If I did it with God, I would probably say, God, I'm ready for my food. Give me. The Israelites here say, God, we're ready for water. Give us. You promised it. If you don't do it now, you also say that you're not present. It reminded me a little bit of the moments when I was still living at home, teenager. Maybe you had such moments. And our bedrooms were upstairs, the kitchen was downstairs, and sometimes you just work on things. You did your homework. I didn't do it, but some people do it. You got deep into a game or something. You realize, oh, I'm hungry. Hopefully dinner is ready. And you go downstairs, and the kitchen is empty, and the dinner table is empty, and you're so disappointed that no one made dinner for you. And I had these moments where I got angry at my mom for not preparing dinner. Even though I was sitting upstairs doing something completely else, and then I come downstairs and I expect that she served my every need and thought about it. And then when I would ask, what's about dinner? I quite often got the answer, just open the fridge, look inside, there's stuff, you can take it out. There's nothing in here, sorry, that's a bad example. But she told me basically, I didn't go grocery shopping, I have bought something. I have prepared for it. I just didn't serve you in that moment every need as you wanted. But things are prepared. Things are provided. Don't worry about it. I'm on top of it, but not in your ways, but in my ways. That is what a provider does. A provider does not just throw things at you when you say I need it. A provider has a plan, has an overview, takes care of it, is on top of it, and gives you at the right time. That does sometimes need that communication. It does need that I'm ready to receive it now. I'm getting hungry. Like when Julia says she's cooking today and I get hungry, then like just sometimes throwing out the sentence, I'm getting hungry. And then she's like, okay, I'm gonna start making food. That doesn't mean I have to take over, because she said she's gonna do it. But it does sometimes need this hint that I'm getting hungry and it would be nice to get there. And maybe prayer is much more like that. To say, God, this is where I'm at. Where are you at? Conversation. Let's talk about it. And God tells you, I'm on top of it. This is my plan. And by this question, rather than saying, give me, why didn't you? Are you even with me? To say, what do you want me to do? Is a much more beautiful step. Because when I get hungry, and Julia's in charge of cooking that day, and I go up and say, hey, I'm getting hungry, what can I do? That changes the whole situation because I become part of the solution rather than just sitting there waiting for her to serve me again. Right? So, do you make God your butler or your provider? Do you understand the difference? You can talk about it in the breakout groups a little more. To me, it feels like the Israelites had an image of God as someone who now Now that God did all this, he has to do even more, and if he doesn't do it, then maybe something is completely wrong. And in all of this, they completely ignore what God had actually done in the past. Or they don't value it. Maybe they didn't ignore it but don't value it. Maybe they didn't take it as a reason to wait more. I got so used to God serving me, to God doing something great, so I'm going to wait for the next time he does it. Maybe they became entitled in some way to all of this experience. But what Moses does instead is amazing, because he takes up his staff, which is a reminder of God's deeds. So that staff of Moses that comes up quite often throughout the story of Exodus. The first time when Moses is in the desert and meets God, and Moses says, so how do they believe in it? He says, take that staff, throw it to the ground, it becomes a snake. And then he does that in front of Pharaoh. And then later, when the Nile turns, the water turns into blood, how does it happen? By Moses hitting with the staff on the water. Interesting how water here, something life-bringing, turns into something that's not worth to bring life anymore. In our story today, then the staff brings living water out of a rock, rather than turning it around. When they are at the Red Sea, they don't know where to go anymore. Moses is called to take his staff and hold it over the water, and the water parts and makes a way for them to walk through. So the staff comes up in the big moments that God does something amazing. It's not a magical stick. It is a symbol of God's presence. From the first time that Moses questioned, are you really God? How do they believe me? That God says, always hold the staff to remind yourself that I am God. I'm powerful. I'm with you. I have a plan, and I'm going to bring you through. And this staff is a powerful reminder for him. And so in the moment that Moses is called to take his staff, and the elders go to the rock and hit on it, like strike the rock, he does take that staff. And I can really imagine him taking that staff being like, wow, so many memories already. May God do one more miracle here. And he walks to the rock and he does what God tells him to do. He doesn't just sit there and complain. He doesn't just sit there and wait, but he says, God, what do you want me to do? Takes up his reminder of God's deeds from the past to say, if God has done all of this, he will fulfill his promise, which was to bring them to the promised land and to be with them in all of this. People of Israel doubted. Moses says, no, I still have the staff. As long as I have the staff in my hands, I always know that God is with me and he's powerful. He hits that rock, water comes out, everything turns out well. But God says, this is a reminder. We call this place Meribah. And then later he does the same thing again in Numbers with the other place that he also calls that rock there Meribah, which is called testing, because they're testing God. They're testing, is God real? Is God true to his promises? Is God who he says he is? Now my question is, in our lives, do we want to always test God, question him? Or do you want to inquire him, to ask, what do you want me to do? And as we take steps of obedience, when God tells us what to do, we will experience how real, alive, and loving he is in our lives. But being part of the solution. And now, Chrissy already said that it's about how do we get living waters in our lives. There's a little plot twist in the Bible when Paul writes about that rock. He writes, all the Israelites ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So he calls that rock that was hit, so water comes out, Christ. He says that is exactly what Jesus did for you. He was that rock that when you are tried out was hit, was crucified for you, so that his blood is living water for us. He is that rock that when we are in a desert that we turn to and we ask, what do you want us to do? And he says, just remember how I got hit, how I died for you, how I went all the way down, so that you may have life. If Jesus is that rock, that means that all these steps, turning to God, inviting him, asking what we should do, seeing God as a provider, becoming part of the solution, taking the staff as a reminder, it all brings Christ glorified. It all points us back to, because Jesus is God and has come to us, we turn to him, we inquire him to seek help, not just to serve us all our needs. We inquire him what we need to do to participate in it. Because then the beautiful thing is, when Jesus talks about living water in John chapter 4 to the woman at the well, he says, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty. Again, talking about the well water. But whoever drinks the water I give them, like the rock that gives living water, will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. He doesn't say you will never have questions again or anything. And we will actually have a sermon soon about that passage as well, by a guest speaker. But the amazing thing that Jesus says here is, if you turn to him, to that rock that living water comes out of, and you ask him, what do you want me to do? You put yourself under his stream of water, and you become like a source of water, like a well, like a spring of water, that water can flow out to other people too as well. But you don't just do that by sitting there and saying, okay, Jesus, give me water. You do it by asking, Jesus, what do you want me to do? Life as a Christian is not just having an opinion about Jesus. It's about following him step by step. Being filled by living water is not just sitting there in front of a fridge and waiting for someone to open it for you and put the things on your table, or even just pour it right into your mouth. No, it's okay, God, what did you already store up for me here, and what do you want me to do? Which also doesn't mean I go to every fridge, I open it and take everything out. It means I live in this relationship of dependency of God, that he tells me what to do, I follow him, and out of that come streams of living water. But it's a life following him and his words, following him in obedience. It's a life of taking up the staff, being reminded, and doing what he tells me. Interestingly, the second time the story comes up, the same quarreling, the same testing of God, they say again, why did you bring us here? Years later. And Moses says, God, what do I do this time? And God says, you see that rock? Go over there and speak to that rock. That water comes out. And Moses is like, I got this. Takes the staff and hits the rock. And God says, no, that is not what I told you. The water still comes out, but it was also the day, the time, the moment that God said, Moses, you did not listen to me. Now you will not see the promised land. You will see it, but you will not experience it. Because the listening and the action together, aligned with God, is what makes his promises come true. And he doesn't need us to make his promises come true, but somehow there's something fascinating about God that he says, follow my commands, follow my words, ask me what to do, and I will lead you a path that is in the promises, in all the promises I have for you. If you step out of that, I cannot guarantee you anything. But the living water is in walking in obedience. And that's the not being thirsty anymore, not because we once got it, but because we follow in these steps. Again, we're also not talking about the big topic, sorry if I clarify too much, the big topic of being, am I saved or not? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living water on an everyday basis, being refreshed on an everyday basis, coming into desert places and needing to be pulled out of it. How do I do it? I do it by asking God, what do you want me to do? Not by sitting there and just complaining or telling God that he did something wrong. And sometimes God is gracious that even if we do that, like for the people of Israel, he sends someone to make a difference. But in the moment we ask, what do you want us to do? That flowing water comes out of the rock that is Christ into our lives. And we become part of something much bigger, because we can also bring that water to other people like Moses. As we become springs of water, living water in us, that fills us and the people around us. As Jesus is that living water, I want to give you a moment of reflecting, like, where do I just sit and ask, give, or demand God to give me, or ask God, why did He do that? Without this next step of, or this alternative, better step of, God, what do you want me to do? What are you doing in my life? What are you doing through me? How am I part of all of this in your will and in your purpose? Take a moment to reflect on that, and I'm going to distribute some bread and juice, and if you want to join us then in communion, celebrating communion, saying, this blood is the living water for me, this bread is the bread of life for me, then we will do that afterwards.